Greetings to episode 7. In today's episode, we're going to talk about what the reconciliation baby is. Before we begin, we must first discuss who and what caused the angelic rebellion, because it's the rebellion that is at the root cause and the need for a reconciliation to take place as a necessary method for our eternal salvation. Over 25 years ago, when I started writing the Heaven Shattered series, I started out by sharing how the first split took place. To my knowledge, there have only been, or at least these two splits that I'm aware of, that have taken place. The second split is what we call the angelic rebellion, and the motivation for reconciliation to be needed for our salvation. As a spiritual seeker, all of us, you included, because here you are listening, who have expanded your awareness well beyond the influence or power of the corrupt ones, you'll be able to tolerate concepts like Lucifer being Jesus' older brother. You'll also be able to contemplate that Lucifer has been wrongfully blamed for causing the fall from heaven and the angelic rebellion. Let me clarify this. That doesn't mean there's not somebody evil. Advanced spiritual seekers can understand that the one that is responsible for all these evils that we experience is so evil that he's been able to not only keep his identity hidden, but nobody believes he even exists. His followers' lies are so prevalent, and we're so confused and brainwashed that we believe everything that we're told, to the point that we will even attack and kill our own saviors, which are the reconciliation babies. Now, these babies, in most cases, lived into their early, or a full lifetime. As a matter of fact, there's been many reconciliation babies, as I'll try to explain later in this episode. I'm going to try to briefly explain the original split and also the second split that became the angelic rebellion, which I have slightly modified from my original telling of the story more than 25 years ago in Volume 1. Admittedly, there was a time in my own search for truth when I couldn't even say the word God without becoming nauseated or physically agitated, to say the least. I found myself using words like universe rather than saying the word God. That's the brainwashing that we're talking about. We've been fooled into using non-generic words like universe rather than saying the word God. Much of my own search for truth has been to overcome the effects of these brainwashings by these self-appointed authority figures, and to become more tolerant to the ideas and concepts that would trigger negative responses. So you look for the things that cause these triggers and these negative responses, and you work on them. These negative responses would force me to stop searching for answers in these specific areas, which slowed down my progress from discovering my truth up until my whole life, my lifetime was over by the time I finally figured it out. As I tell the story, it's riddled with confusing applications of gender. This is what we're going through right now. They've got us coming and going when gender is applied. This is so they can wipe out the reconciliation or the need for a reconciliation. They don't want it to happen. And I'll get to that later on too. Even though there's only two genders in the harsh realm, it's still difficult to try and kind of make sense of a subject matter that takes place in a non-physical universe and spills over into a physical universe, unless the listener has personally experienced things like out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences. Please excuse me if I get a little confused in my explanation. It It's confusing at times to myself. Just the back and forth of the mother, the father, the empress, the emperor, God and the goddess. It is very, very confusing at times. So this might be a long enough episode that I might have to split it in two. I'll see at the end how I do it. So in the beginning, there was only God. No opposite polarity, no better half, just one God. It was at some point, which has been lost to the annals of time, that God felt movement within himself. And though he had not intentionally asked to experience this phenomena, he suddenly became aware of his own existence. We might venture to say through this one movement and thought. This movement, as it turned out, was God's feminine aspect, somehow managing to become noticed by the totality. Because the nature of this movement was so completely foreign, it caused God to startle. I'm not going to really say it was in a state of fear, because fear is an emotion that is contained within the feminine aspect, or as we call in the books, will of God. It's the will of God that now suddenly found itself beyond God's borders. Before God realized the ramification of what had just happened, a great void appeared, and God realized that something might be missing. Missing, lost in the deep dark space that surrounded God, was God's will, or feminine half, for a lack of a better term. Lost was God's sense of survival, need to create, and desire for continuance. This is a way of procreation, keeping the line going. This had not come up before. It was this lack of emotional response that gave the angelic core the impression that God didn't care. We know that eventually God did search for his will and did finally find it. But by the time a reintegration was to take place, the will had already developed serious issues and mixed feelings about any reunion taking place. In short, the split had created two aspects of God. So here's where the split starts taking place. God, the masculine polarity, and the goddess, which was the feminine polarity. It was the goddess that had been abandoned, rejected, and pushed outside the very sphere of God's light. And now I'm going to use the term she was now secretly entertaining her own autonomy. No matter how many times God and the goddess tried to reconcile their differences, something would always crop up, something that would always happen, and get in the way of everlasting happiness. It would be a long time, but things did seem to calm down for a very long time. Long enough for all the angels in heaven to stop worrying about things like a divorce. As God focused more attention on the two aspects working together. Oh, sorry about that. That's my emails. As God focused more attention on the two aspects working together as one, God's light, it did become greater, and new angelic creatures of all kind did come forth in a host of multi-dimensional realities, eventually becoming the Holy Empire, as we call it in the books. The Holy Empire, growing at such a phenomenal pace, we now know it was always part of God's plan to seek a permanent solution to the threat of another split taking place by making one of the oldest angels in the angelic corps, Lucifer, the commander-in-chief of a newly formed angelic force that consisted of 4 orders. The first order consisted of a central command unit, which was in charge of protecting the Godhead, as well as running all the administrational functions. The second order was charged with maintaining the outer defenses of the Godhead. The third order, charged with maintaining the internal order within the Godhead. The fourth order was charged with protecting the goddess. depending on who's telling the story, the goddess, while in the harsh realm, like the third dimension, while she's there, she's known as the Empress, or as some call her, Mother Nature. So you'll see this is where it gets confusing when we start using these different terms and names. Lucifer, as commander-in-chief, established a sense of camaraderie amongst his admirals and generals, and quickly gained their admiration and trust. He was now officially the first angel to have this much power and responsibility. When I first started my spiritual quest for my, for my truth, back in 1986, after my second near death, it was Lucifer that was reported to be corrupt absolutely by power. That's the way I understood the story. I never argued that fact. 30 years later, now it's 2018, I believe that it was an angel named Samiel that became corrupted absolutely, one of Lucifer's most entrusted commanders, who he had put in charge of the fourth order of angels. Samiel, once given the authority and free reign on earth, wasted no time talking about the need for evolution, telling everybody that change was in order, since in his opinion the Holy Empire had quickly become stagnant under the present power structure and had lost its appeal to the menial angels. That's the lower orders, not the archangels. That he actually falsely believed that he now represented. Meanwhile, Lucifer, burdened with an overgrowing workload, God spending more of his time as the Holy Spirit, moving about freely in the physical dimensions. And I'm going to explain that in a little bit. We shouldn't be too surprised when the goddess starts demanding, as promised during the first reconciliation, more authority. To further explain the harsh reality, as planet Earth is in the physical dimensions, harsh realm as I call it, it's located deep within the totality of God, called the Godhead. The totality we think of as God could never actually travel to anywhere in particular without setting the entire universe of the Godhead in motion. God, being omnipresent, manifested an aspect of himself which he calls the Emperor to travel within the Godhead. The need to create the Holy Spirit was so God could physically travel in the harsh realm. But again, I'm mentioning here in the harsh realm that he's still in spirit. There doesn't seem to be any story of God being in the physical. But as you read the books, you'll find out that God is capable of doing anything. This is something we don't find out about, anyways, until the third book, entitled Authority Taken. The Emperor is located in the Holy Empire and soft realm, as sort of surrounds the harsh realm. It's sort of like the levels keep getting denser as we keep getting deeper into the Godhead. The Holy Spirit, or as we sometimes call Father, is spirit to physical made manifestation inside the harsh realm, deeper inside. The Emperor, moving about in the physical realm as the Holy Spirit, could travel with the Empress, that's the mother, to any part of the denser lower vibration, but was almost always seen as being in the spirit, and very rarely in the story as manifested into physical body. The Holy Empire consists of planets like Earth. It allowed angels to interact as men and women in separate entities. This is what God is experiencing through us, experiencing the God and Goddess. It's that separation that first took place. We're experiencing different permutations, different lifetimes, and teaching God who God is. The Dark Ones call this whole thing of wanting to go back to heaven the Hive Collective. Um, they talk about it as being negative. They want the separation, they want it to take place, and they want to be individuals. And they want to now, you just see it in the media. They want us to think in terms of being whatever we want. They want to go outside the masculine, feminine, and we'll talk about why they want to do that. They don't want us to think in gender anymore. They want us to think in terms of whatever we want. This is all in keeping with the theme of man becoming God, manifesting whatever he wants. This keeps us here. This keeps us here indefinitely. So God needed a place that would comply with the goddess's demands, a dimension that would allow both polarities to interact equally without canceling each other out. The denser dimension was a greater success that God experienced. He created this denser realm. It's called a binary system. It was created and developed so the two polarities could share the power equally, something that could only take place within a dense reality, and yet still not real, because it's like God having a dream of living these things out. A place where, I guess you could explain it as a place where a pair of energies, God, goddess, related sources of equal power and influence, such as God, which now had two opposites, or as some describe, two sides of the same coin. Binary opposition was the system by which in our language and in our thought, two theoretical can't say the word, opposites are strictly defined and set off against each other, creating movement. For this is to have a positive, good reaction outcome. One of the two sources of power, such as we have here in the negative and positive, right or left, or even as we have referred to as the coin with its front and back side, and God kind of sandwiched in between, showing out as the coin's edge. Binary opposition is an important system of maintaining forward movement, which is fundamental to all of our life processes, language and thought, giving value and meaning. It's a push in opposition, which is defined in reciprocal determination with the other term as in binary code. It is not a contradictory relationship to push against the other, but a structural complementary force. So this is needed. An example of this idea is that a person cannot conceive of good if they do not understand bad. Another example is how we can't conceive of God if we don't understand God's alter ego, the devil. As Landor always said, search for God and you'll find everything that God is not, namely the devil. For in order to be maintained in God's universe, one of the two opposites must therefore assume the role of dominance over the other. And when I use the word dominance, it's not more powerful. It's just, in short, it's to create movement. Something has to go first. It's the first movement. This movement is not real because God is not present. You see, God is still only spirit. It's like a dream. It's like God's only observing. It's an illusionary feeling or expression to create the feeling of movement while keeping order. This is important. When we say that it's not real, we use the age-old puzzle to explain which came first, the chicken or the egg. There is no beginning and there is no end. There is only the idea that it's taking place, much like having a day or nighttime dream. Angels like Samuel believed that by keeping the masculine in the role of dominance did not serve to keep order, but to stagnate the whole system with dire consequences, which always left the feminine polarity being literally pushed around. Samuel's followers believe that a greater growth comes from chaos. That's why they love to employ the lone gunman, for instance, to force change. Chaos is the one man with the one gun that requires hundreds, if not thousands, of other men of order working together to bring chaos events back into order. Furthermore, binary opposition have to deal with hidden levels of different binaries set up to reinforce and keep order in place. For example, the concept of what we call white and black hats, for instance. So, some people call it a white and black hat, which is the concept of good and bad. This involves second binaries, which with unseen importance, not understood or recognized as important to the greater story being experienced. So we go down another level. It's nice and bad, attractive and ugly, fat and thin, love, hate, and so on. These are all hidden from view, and from the feminine perspective, these secondary binaries are emotional traits that must be followed to maintain masculine order. So here's where the feeling of things are out of, they're not getting their due. They're just due. This binary reality of opposites pushing each other back and forth enabled God to, at least in the physical realities, as Emperor, Holy Spirit, and Empress, Mother Nature, express their love for each other and share the power as equally as possible, with the agreed knowledge that the masculine side was always pushing first. The masculine energy is the active component in reality, whereas the feminine energy is the motivation. So just as all dramas play out in the harsh realm, rumor had it that God over time had become jealous that the Empress appeared to love the Emperor more than God, even though God and the Emperor, Holy Spirit, were in fact the same. I'm not privy to why God may or may not have had these feelings, or if God had planned it this way all along as a method to self-actualization. I'm sure that's probably what it is. Who knows? In any case, this turned out to be the opportunity that Samuel and his associates had been hoping for. Samuel's duties to follow and protect the Empress put him in the right place and the right time when she traveled to Earth alone. Samuel knowing the limitations upon God. And basically I want to clarify here. At this point in the Heaven Shattered series, we know that God makes all the rules and God can bend all the rules. There is nothing God can't do. But for the, let's call them the religious, the mundane, God has limitations, and the devil doesn't seem to have any limitations. This is so ridiculous. So it should be no surprise in the story that Samuel is easily able to trick the Empress into thinking that God was planning to push her back into the darkness. The Empress became an emotional wreck, an emotional creature who is at this point separated from the masculine, all alone in the physical, with no real masculine logic to guide her, became an emotional wreck. It's no surprise she was irrational when she listened to Samuel's suggestions that she scatter her essence, basically fragmenting herself into billions of pieces and scattering them all around the planet in hopes of hiding from God. Like a false flag that even our own governments play on us all the time. Samuel began a campaign of half-truths and rumors amongst the Fourth Order angels to the fate of the Empress Mother. Whenever any angel challenged him on his dire reporting of her, his reply was always the same. So where is the Empress? Samuel knew that the angels now trapped on earth had no contact with Central Command and had now lost contact with their mother, and they could basically be easily confused without any guidance at all. To the contrary. In terms of modern time distractions, something as simple as a new iPhone can distract a soul for days, even months. It was a period of total and absolute confusion that initiated the second split, which marked the onset of the angelic rebellion. The angelic warriors of the Fourth Order would only realize what had happened when they died and traversed their way back home, following the light. The white light, I should add too. Once they have reached the source of the light, they are confronted by the dark evil ones, the reincarnation overlords, and they're convinced to re-enter the reincarnation cycle. Crippled by guilt of being a fallen one, once they die, they start to remember. They appeared to have chosen a side between the Empress and the Mother, and the Emperor and the Father. It was easier to just go back into hiding within their lifetimes on Earth, rather than deal with the truth. With the goddess missing and Lucifer nowhere to be found, God initially sent half of the second order of angelic warriors to Earth to find out what was happening. But when these angels were never heard again by Central Command, God was at a loss for what to do next. Back in the harsh realm, Samuel and his associates had fragmented their souls into billions of fragments like the Mother, meaning, as millions of fragments, they actually then could experience millions of lifetimes simultaneously. So there's these soul fragments all over the place, and they start to realize they can have more than one lifetime at a time. They can have multiple lifetimes, and it's sped up. They're basically regaining their memories of who they were or who they are. Soon they were making plans to control the harsh realm and remain as gods forever. Throughout this ordeal, God wanted to travel to Earth in person, but the only way he could was to break his own rules. The rule is that God could only enter the physical world as the Holy Spirit or Emperor. The Holy Spirit is a non-physical spirit that can move within a physical reality, but only a spirit, what we used to call the ghost. The Dark Ones only need to trick everyone into believing only the physical reality was real and the ghosts were not. So here begins the story about, the wiping out and rewriting history, that God doesn't exist. God's own rules demanded that only as a spirit could he save a soul, and only if the soul had asked God directly for atonement. He couldn't break their free will. Unfortunately, the angels had forgotten their true identity, and when they started to remember, they could not understand why God had abandoned them. This always seems to be the first thing they think of. Why Daddy left us. God has always held true to his own rules and has never overridden the angels' free will to believe whatever they believed. This, unfortunately, has also increased their belief that the harsh realm was real and the soft spiritual realm was not. Blocked from ever entering the third dimension in physical form without destroying the very souls that he wanted to save. It's important to understand that you're here of your own free will, and according to God's law, it's not his place to interfere with your free will. Once you truly and totally surrender to God and give up your need to control the outcome of basically, this is a nightmare, will God be able to intervene on your behalf and help you to wake you up? Which means you will find yourself back in the soft realm of the Godhead. Yes, God has no limitations here on earth or anywhere else in God's universe. I figure it's because humans love to be entertained. They love to figure out mysteries, and let's just say it was to make the story more dramatic. God chose to only enter the harsh realm as the Emperor or Holy Spirit. You could say that God has tried one of his hands. He's basically tied one of his hands behind his back to level the playing field. I don't really think so. I think it was to motivate the Dark Ones into believing they might have a chance at beating God. And that way take the step that they took. To further explain, when the goddess Empress Mother slipped away from the Godhead into the darkness and fragmented, she slipped into something akin to a nightmare which we all share in because we all followed her. As God in his grand totality cannot follow her or even us into the nightmare without giving the nightmare its reality, that's basically why it's believed that a person experiencing a nightmare should not be awoken, because in that fleeting moment between being asleep in the nightmare and waking up, the person might become confused and trapped into the nightmare permanently. For God to wake us up out of our own created nightmare would only serve to validate the nightmare's authenticity. In other words, giving a greater believability. So each day the mother and her children, the followers, have forgotten a little more each day and deeper into their nightmare on earth. Humans and angels alike, without question, believe that we are from the harsh realm with no connection to the soft realm, trapped here forever in a nightmare with no hope of redemption. My message in the Heaven Shattered series is that there is a safe method of recovering our lost identity and safely waking from the nightmare, which sets us free from our nightmare. Don't let the Dark Ones ridicule and make jokes about spiritual seekers, saying things like woke. Don't let them dissuade your efforts. Think of it this way: whenever someone jokes about someone being woke, this is a good indication of a Dark One who's revealing who they are to you. Basically, you've got to shift your way of thinking that everybody is basically good. No, they're not. They've been brainwashed and they're lost. And it's up to you to save yourself. So don't go along with their jokes. Don't even contemplate their jokes, because you find yourself reverting back to being a mundane very quickly. We must always be mindful not to call attention to ourselves, for the very reason that they will fight you and drag you back down to their level of understanding at any cost. It's not comforting thought that there are more souls on earth who don't want to wake up from the nightmare than the number of souls that are in the process at any one time waking. The Dark Ones have invested everything they have and what they have to trick all of us into giving over to their false stories. Until you understand that they will never accept what they call our hive mentality of wanting to be connected to the one God, they will continue to risk your quest for your truth. They're gods here, and we're not. Getting back to our explanation of the rebellion. So you could say that all hope was lost until something totally unexpected happened. A small group of angels, led by Lucifer's younger brother, Laniel, in the story, who you later on understand is Jesus, managed to escape and find their way home. We, the advanced truth seekers, can handle the story that Lucifer helped Laniel escape, helping him to follow God's golden bright yellow light. An example is the Well, I'll mention Lucifer's got white light and God's got gold light. It's the gold light that you must follow. An example is like L. Frank Baum's 1900 children's book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, where he had the heroine of the story, Dorothy, and her followers following the yellow brick road. That's an indication. You follow the yellow light to get home. Lucifer explained to us in Book 3, Volume 3, Authority Taken, how his white light is being used by the Dark Ones to keep the reincarnation cycle in operation, and how by prolonging our time trapped on Earth, they will eventually win everlasting godhood. Lanil's safe return to the Godhead ignited hope that there might be a chance not only to save the Empress and much of her Fourth Order angels, but it's very clear that not all souls are going to ever be saved. We're going to lose a lot. This is going to be a terrible tragedy. Lanil brought back important information that shed light on the way and how the angelic warriors were being tricked not to return to heaven, how they were following the white light and back into the reincarnation cycle, how the low vibration of the solid realm, harsh realm, was causing angels to temporarily or permanently lose their memory. And by the time an angel did start to recover their memory, Samuel and his associates would waste no time in confusing them all over again with false flags and distractions into reincarnating to the harsh realm. God immediately put Lanil in charge of selecting and training a special group of angelic warriors, which we know were called exceptionals. The exceptionals were to be secretly injected into the reincarnation cycle. And this marks one of the reincarnation babies. Lanil was to become a reconciliation baby during this lifetime as Jesus. His team of exceptionals would be his followers, and together they would be planted deep within the subconscious, together they would be planting deep within the subconscious of the harsh realm the knowledge of their true nature and path to salvation. The Dark Ones we now call people like the New World Globalist, the New World Order, continue to use periods of confusion to their advantage by creating fake news, false flag distractions, and by the way, false flag does not mean it didn't happen. It means that the narrative that we're being told is a lie. Not that people didn't die. It's that something else is going on to drive another story that we're not privy to. These are all distractions. And through the use of daily things like sex, mind-altering drugs, and gender bending, and if that doesn't work on the individual, say they're religious, they can always twist and corrupt the leaders of all the religions. Fallen angels are compelled by the Dark Ones to continually doubt that God really exists. They belittle the truth seeker by ridiculing them, by calling them things like conspiracy theorists or tinfoil hat fools. Even if a seeker has finally reached a level of awareness, they can always be hit with a tragic crisis, a financial crisis, the death of a loved one, that will have them hiding in fear of the wrath of God. Because it's always God that did it. This is the only time that God exists to the Dark Ones, is when we want to blame someone or something. In a personal crisis, angels will always choose to go back into hiding through the reincarnation process. Starting over in a new lifetime feels a lot safer than taking their chance experiencing a life review. This is really important. When you go to the white light and you see a life review, they're allowing you to see things that are going to want you to come back. They're going to show and focus on your failures. When you get to the gold light, it's a completely different story. You get to see your accomplishments. The dark ones continue to keep everyone in the dark by convincing them if they want to see God, they must look for God outside of themselves. And that works because we are the fallen ones. We cannot remember who we are. And we certainly don't remember who God is. I'm going to take a pause for a second here. This may be where I split the video in two. I'm not quite sure yet. As we're at the 40-minute mark here. Okay, so